Hello and welcome to Matrix Live. It feels like the last time I was the host of Matrix Live was ages ago. I think it was in July. So, I was not fired. I'm still here. And today I'm with Andy, senior software engineer and tech lead of the Element Web team. Andy is here because he is against the state on Matrix. Not the state with a capital S, but the state in Matrix rooms. Or rather, Andy would like less of the state. The state I'm talking about is obviously not the state that enforces rules of a country, but the matrix state. So, Andy, first of all, welcome.
Thank
And to
you.
help us understand what is state, can you tell us what is happening behind the scenes if I create a new room on Matrix, send a message in the void, and invite you in that room?
Yeah, so the state in Matrix it's in a room and it tells you stuff about that room, not messages that are sent, but other stuff you need to know. So when we create a new room, we send some information to your Matrix server, your home server, and the server creates a room, and inside that room, it creates some what are called state events. So normal events would be messages or reactions or something like that. State events are special events that come through, which your Matrix client can then use to show things like the name of the room or the topic or who is a member of that room. So all that information is represented in these things that are called state events.
All right, so there is a state event being sent, for example, when I'm creating a room, like I'm sending a state event to the server and to a
So,
particular room that I'm creating.
so, so technically, you don't send a state event to the server. Like some state events you can send, but technically you tell the server to create a room, and then it makes it look like you sent a state event.
Oh,
But
all
yes,
right.
so some of them work like that. But generally, yeah, when you enter a room, you get a whole load of state, which comes in the form of these state events, which tell you information about the room.
Okay, and when I'm going to send a message in the room, that is not a state event.
That's right. That's I don't know what we call it, a normal event or
All right.
something else.
And when you join the room, that is a state event.
Yes. Yeah. Changes to membership, changes to other kind of basically all the information you need that you'll always need if you're entering that room, that will be in a state event.
All right, so it seems to be a pretty close definition to what metadata is, but it's not all the metadata that lives on the matrix side. So that seems pretty useful to me. Off the top of my head, it sounds like what you need to rebuild what has been happening in a matrix room and making sure that over federation the various parties that have tried to join the room are allowed to do so my server should send the history of the room to the servers. So basically trying to make sure that everybody is playing by the rules of the matrix specification more precisely. So it seems fairly important. Can there be too much of a state?
Yeah, so it is very important, and I guess that's why this matters, right? In order to do anything on Matrix, you have to have that state, at least anything in a room. So you have to send it to whoever is participating in that room, and if that becomes a burden, that's a real problem because it's so important.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so the situation is that some of that state that we send every time may have become irrelevant. It may have been relevant at some point, and now it's not relevant. So an example, the easiest to understand example, is if someone entered a room and then left a room again. So that's interesting historically, but it's no longer relevant if you're entering a room later in terms of knowing who is a member of that room. Instead of sending the state that says this person left, we could just say nothing, and then we would assume that they weren't in the room, and you'd end up in the same place. So we have this idea of some of that state being irrelevant, but it's not as simple as it first sounds, because if you're already in that room and you think someone is a member, then the fact that they left is now highly relevant to you, because otherwise you'd have the wrong list of people who are in the room. So we need a way to distinguish between like who cares about whether this irrelevant state is really irrelevant, that's where things get really difficult, especially in a federated distributed system like Matrix.
All right. So I think one thing we have not mentioned here that comes to mind might be state resolution. Are those state events connected to one another in some way? And is some work happening when you are reading the state events to know how the room looks like?
Yeah. So I made the mistake of mentioning the federated distributed world. So now we have to think about this stuff. But yeah, so state resolution comes into play when two people have potentially a different idea of the state of the room, perhaps because the network between them broke down or something like that. So in a situation where there's potentially conflicting things in the state, like this person is a member or this person isn't a member, what the state resolution algorithm does is gives us a well-defined set of rules, which means that if everyone has the same list of state events, they will come to the same answer about all that important information, like who's allowed to read these messages and who's not, and all that stuff. So it's not directly related to deleting state, but it's definitely related to state events and how we handle them.
All right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have an idea of, can you give examples of typical applications that would sort of pollute the state, send a lot of state events that are very intensive for the various clients and servers?
Yeah, so we've already talked about joining and leaving, and in very busy rooms, the number of people who've just left and aren't relevant can become big. So that's one example. Another example is some of the newer features available in some Matrix clients, like location sharing. So when you do a live location share, you add a state event into the room saying, I'm currently sharing my location. And that's very useful because anyone entering the room wants that list of like who's currently showing their live location. That seems important enough, relevant enough to be a state event, and not to have to go back and search through history just to find out who's currently sharing their location. But it does mean that you've got potentially a lot of those types of state events being created. And there are also future proposals that make that feature work more nicely. So at the moment, in order to do that, you need to have enough permission to create a state event, which is a bit awkward because not everyone always has those permissions, but you probably want, in some rooms at least, you probably want most people to be able to share their live location. So there's various proposals about making it easier to share a state event within certain boundaries, so you can't just trample over important stuff. And those proposals, if they come through, will mean that more and more state events are likely to appear in rooms if people use those features. So I can imagine situations where, for example, there's a bot which is in a room, and every 2 minutes it creates a new live location share, and you end up with millions and millions of different state events in that room, which would mean anyone trying to join that room would have to download all of those, which would be a huge burden. And most of them are irrelevant because the live location share has stopped. So you don't really care anymore.
Yeah.
So this is the problem. Like, how can we ignore those events when they potentially could be relevant to anyone who thinks that the live location share is still going on, but they're not relevant to someone coming in new?
Yeah, right. I think I have another idea of thing that might be polluting the state as well, and it's a bridge. Like with Matrix, you are constantly online. If you join a room, the only way to leave a room is, well, to actually leave a room explicitly. But one of the known features of Matrix are bridges, and particularly bridges to IRC, which behave pretty differently. Basically, if you don't have a bouncer, anytime you close your IRC client, you are leaving all the rooms. So I guess this is creating a lot of pollution in the various rooms that are bridged to IRC as well. Is it the case?
Yeah, so yes, definitely. It's limited because we don't have to remember the entire history of someone left and then joined and then left and then joined and left and joined. It's only kind of the last one that matters. So
Okay.
it scales with the number of people in the room, not with the number of leave and join events. So it's not quite as bad as you might first think, but still bad.
All right. So I was thinking of a way to hack my way around that, and there
Mhm.
is this, grim little event called the Tombstone Event, and that basically consists of telling all the clients, okay, let's archive this. That was a very busy room. Now everything is over here. We are archiving that, and please go to that fancy, fresh new room with clean state. So, is it a good solution? Can I get a raise, or did I miss anything?
Well, I'm slightly worried that what you've done there is read ahead and come up with this clever idea, because but essentially what we did a couple of years ago, or at least a year ago, is we had a really big conversation about how are we going to handle this problem of too much state, especially in busy rooms, and we spent a lot of time talking through different ways of essentially saying there's a line in the sand where this room no longer needs the old stuff and instead it has the new stuff. And although we haven't completely given up on that idea, it became more and more complicated to talk about. And what we ended up saying is that anytime we do that, what we're really doing is like making a new create event. We're starting almost like we're starting the room again from scratch. And so the conversation then led on to, well, why don't we use the mechanism we already have for doing that, which is exactly the one you mentioned, which is upgrading rooms. And so our current plan for how to at least make this problem better, if not completely solve it, is to use room upgrades. But the problem with room upgrades is that they're terrible in many
Oh,
ways.
yes.
So if you've experienced a room upgrade happening in one of the rooms you're in, you might have seen some of the downsides.
Yeah, to me, I think maybe you want to describe what's happening when there is a room upgrade before I complain.
Yeah, so what's happening under the hood is that an administrator of the room makes one of these events called a Tombstone Event, which essentially tells all the clients participating in the room, stop using this room and go and look at this new room instead. So what that looks like, you're, as a person in the room, is different depending on what client you're using. But in lots of clients, that would look very similar to how I described. There would be a thing in your timeline saying, this room is finished, click here to open the new version of it. And that kind of works sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. The experience is suboptimal because if you are not there when the Tombstone event is being posted, like if you were on holidays for a week, for example, and you don't click that link, then you are missing the whole history for the week. Or are
Yeah,
you? Yeah, I'm not
yeah,
making that up.
certainly. Certainly in an encrypted room,
Yeah, right.
the experience is particularly bad because of things like that. Because you may not even be able to enter the new room if an encrypted room has been upgraded. So it's really bad. So what happened when we had this conversation and said, we should fix this by using room upgrades, is we quickly moved on to, all right, we should probably fix room upgrades.
What's a good idea?
So we then put a significant amount of work into planning and designing some things that would improve room upgrades. So the piece of work that I'm talking about is called MSC 3901, and in there we have a little bit of stuff about obsolete state, and then we have a lot of stuff about what are the most basic things we can do to make room upgrades better. So that includes automatically inviting everyone who is in the old room to the new room. Potentially also means automatically accepting those invitations so that the person is considered to be participating in the room right from the beginning, which means they should be able to see the messages even if they were on holiday. And it also means copying across more of the information about the old room to the new room. So the new room looks more like the old room than it does now. So at the moment, a lot of stuff can get lost. You'll get things like the name and the topic, but you'll lose a lot of stuff, especially custom stuff that we don't even necessarily know about. So copying more stuff across. And then the MSC ends with a wild, crazy proposal to make this even smoother by keeping room IDs the same when you move to an upgraded room.
Ooh,
And this is
dragons.
where it really, really goes off piste. This is where it gets exciting. So the reason for that, and it's really, really important reason, is that integrations with a room are all broken when you upgrade. So what I mean by that is, if there's a bot in the room, if there's some external service that somehow uses that room, all of those are going to be using the room ID to know which room they're talking about. So if you upgrade, all of those things will disappear, and suddenly your bot that was working, or your other external service, or anything else that was using that room ID, will still think it's dealing with the old room, and it'll disappear from the new room. So if we can find a way of keeping room IDs consistent, we've solved that problem. But it's a hard problem.
All right. So you mentioned MSC 3901. What is the status of that MSC? Is it something that is done and going to land in the clients and servers soon? Is it something you need help with?
So I would say it's, in terms of writing it, it's, I don't know, 75% done, or even higher. I'm fairly happy that it makes sense, and I haven't received feedback from people who know about spec stuff that it doesn't make sense. I think there's a feeling that at least some of it makes some sense. But in terms of implementing it in clients and servers, it's completely not done.
Okay.
It's just a proposal at this point.
So what is the point of talking about that in Matrix Live? So are you trying to incentivize to try it out in real life and bump into problems and report the problems? Is it do you have a specific grand master plan for that MSC?
Yeah. So the point of talking about it on Matrix Live is to try and sell it, right? To say to everyone out there, there is hope. There is a proposal for making this aspect of Matrix better, which is both. Yeah, exactly. And it's actually two aspects, right? It's the too much state problem, and it's also the room upgrades are painful problem. So there is hope to improve both of those situations. By the way, this proposal wouldn't completely solve either of them, but it would move both of them forwards quite a long way, I think. And so I want to sell it and say, this is a sensible way forward that appears to make sense to people who know about the spec. And maybe you should invest in helping make it a reality.
All right, so there is interesting momentum on that MSC, and it would be too bad if it was lost, but you don't have the bandwidth and the capacity to work on that at the moment. So what you're trying to do is either to get somebody to work on that or somebody to fund that. Like, if you're interested, please reach out to the vendor of your choice to make that a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking that there might be someone out there who's struggling with this problem, who has bots that fill up the state, and then the rooms become unusable, and they have to manually upgrade or something like that. Who thinks this is something I need to solve, and so I should pay someone to solve it, and this would be a path forward if you're in that situation. Or maybe there's a community member who thinks this is an important thing about Matrix that we should get right, and would be prepared to put in work to do it. I would say this is not a trivial piece of work, right? So if you want to do it as a volunteer, you're going to be committed for a lot of work.
All right, and if somebody was willing to put that work in, would you be able to mentor them for the first step? What do they need to do to take over the MSC?
Yeah, so I don't think they necessarily would need to take over the MSC. So I'm happy maintaining that. I'm also happy collaborating with anyone who's working on it. I'm sure would have insights and things, and I'd be happy to either hand over or collaborate. But I don't think you need to take on the work of the MSC. The work that I'm proposing you take on is implementing it, validating it, checking that it actually makes any sense. And so the first step of that work would be a relatively modest proposal. So the first chunk of this MSC is to define what state is obsolete and how it works, and then to refuse to send obsolete state to a client when they're joining a room from fresh, because we know that it's not relevant to them at that point. So that piece of work, I think, could stand alone. It doesn't need to, it will immediately give us some benefit, which is that when you join a new room that's very complicated, you have to download less JSON. So you would definitely get benefit from that. But it's relatively self-contained, and it would have the huge benefit, I think, of pushing forward this idea that some state is obsolete, and there's a clear definition for what that is, which we can then use in later MSCs to say, for example, don't copy obsolete state to an upgraded room, or various other. That definition is really useful for the rest of the proposal. Does that make sense?
All right. Yeah, it does make a lot of sense, at least to me. So I hope it's going to make a lot of sense for the audience as well. Is there anything else we forgot to mention?
I don't think so. I just think like this is. I want to say that this is like an optimistic thing, right? Like we have a reasonably well-defined path, and if the right person steps up to follow that path, things will get a little bit better.
All right, fantastic. Well, in that case, thank you very much, Andy. I think that's going to be it for us, Matrix Lab. I will see you next week, so I'm not really sure what the next episode is going to be. It's probably going to be something about the new Matrix authentication service. So you might have heard that Matrix is going big on everything OpenID Connect, and there is a bit of confusion sometimes between the old OpenID Connect, the old way to handle OpenID Connect, and the new way. So it's probably going to be about clarifying that. Anyway, have a nice week and see you next time. See you around Matrix Live.
Thanks, bye.